feeling the pressure of using my most polished English words because I tend to be very harsh on myself. I feel that if I not convey the right message, then all of this is going to be trash and it's not going to be worth it or usable. So I tend to do that all the time with many little things, like little conversations, or whenever I try to succeed at my job. But well, sometimes I cannot do it,
Yeah.
and I struggle a lot. I grew up in a cult. It was Mormonism, and I firmly believed in it for many years. Then I started to disagree with some parts of its history, its principles. I felt uncomfortable with the way they treated certain people, and I I think it was about a 2-year period in which I managed to finally detach from all of that, but the trauma was still there. There were so many rules and so many expectations. One of the uh, phrases that has stuck with me the most was this something similar as to you need to be perfect, like the Lord that is perfect. So I took that very seriously. I used to take that very seriously. I wanted to be that. And well, living the cult also led me with an identity crisis because they teach you who you were literally before this life, what you have to do during this period of time, what will happen after. So all of that was settled in stone, and that was supposed to be all I could ever be. I remember. I'm sorry, is the background noise a problem?
That's okay. That's okay. We'll figure out how to cut it out later on in life.
Okay. I hope I'm not taking too much time. How
No,
much
you're
time?
fine.
Yes.
Take all the time you need to.
Okay. Oh, that happens a lot. I worry about being inadequate, and it's something that's I tend to say as a joke, but it's really tiring because it's all the time about every little thing,
Yeah.
posture, hair, the way I pronounce things, or the way I look at people, or if I'm making the joke funny enough. It's just this constant uh, self-awareness that I think it's up to a level that is not good. Well, I know for
Yeah.
certain that it's not good.
Mm.
Yeah. Once I decided to to break free from that cult, it was tough, and it is still tough because
Still tough. Yeah.
most of my family members are still Mormon. They all deeply believe in all of that, and whenever I listen to any of the messages from the leaders of that cult, I get a very physical, strong reaction because I cannot stand
Sure.
and believe all of the things that I used to do. I wouldn't even focus on learning more about the world because I thought I knew everything I had to know.
Yeah.
It was I felt at such a disadvantage later on in life when I realized that I could have used all those years that I spent learning stupid doctrines and I knew a lot. I knew basically everything about black holes. And I still
Yeah.
would spend hours, days, and that was some time that I could have used to learn something more useful
Yeah.
and become a different person. And sometimes I grieve that time of my life. Well, I do it a lot, not sometimes. And it's an integral part of the story because when I was in the cold, I used to be depressed without knowing. And my way of pushing through was through faith, just asking God to save me, to protect
Yeah.
me. And I would trust that everything would be better. But there was a point in college, precisely, where I couldn't even like stand up on time. What? Wake up on time. I'm sorry, for my classes, and uh, I was like an excellent student for 2 semesters, but during the third semester, everything started falling apart,
Yeah.
and it was also when I was having this transition from the cold life to knowing who I was and experiencing all
Yeah.
that. And I had issues with my hygiene. I wasn't able to properly polish myself to go to school. And if I had class at 7, I would get there at 10, and I would miss presentations, classes, exams. And that was part of the biggest struggles that I've had. And
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not going chronologically, but who cares? It's just
Well, I mean, but I mean, if I can make an observation though, it's like your life hasn't been chronological, right? I mean, like you said, your identity was kind of like formed for you, and a lot of that happens very early on in life, and you're getting to do that now, and that seems strange, because it's like, wait a minute, like that's what you do as a child on into like adulthood, and it seems like you're doing it backwards, but I mean, to look at it in more of a light, it's the fact that you're getting to do it, but I completely understand why, like, even just telling the story feels like you're saying things out of order, because that's unfortunately what happened to you, that you were thrown out of order, and now you get to piece the puzzle back, and do that. So completely understandable.
parts that I uh, avoided because for the majority of my life, I tried not to think about them. For instance, at
Sure.
home, there was this abuse. My dad used to be very violent. He still is, but not in a physical way like he used to. He once hit my mom when I was like 9, and I found out because I heard her screaming. So I just went upstairs, really worried, and I
Yeah.
slightly opened the door, and I saw her. She was on her knees begging, like this. And I remember that.
Yeah.
And when I wanted to confront my father about that, like 3 years ago, he was
Why?
like, the expression he made was as if I was overreacting to it. And even my mom did the same. My mom has remained with him ever since they met, and she started seeing the signs of abuse ever since they started their relationship. But she was very fragile, very broken at that time, and that was that was what she held on to. So
Yeah.
um and yeah, I saw that, and my father was always very controlling. Whenever we went on holiday, because we went uh, with my mom, my brother, and I, the three of us would go away, and he would go through every single one of our things to check what was there. We had no privacy, and he would change it the way he wanted to. Some things would disappear, and I was afraid of even, show any interest in any person while I was growing up, because he would make it such a terrible thing to do. If
Yeah.
someone that I liked, like in middle school, would give me a little letter, I would have to hide it in a very specific way and take it with me while I was away, because otherwise he would go through my things, and then once I came back, he would look at me in as if he was disgusted of me.
Yeah.
And I also grew up with my grandmother, his mom. So it's understandable why he would be that way, but I don't forgive him because he hasn't tried to change. But his grandmother was also a terrible person. My grandmother was also a terrible person, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And she would she was obsessed with the cold, and she was obsessed with sex as well, which is an interesting combination because
Yeah.
while I was a kid, I would listen to weird stuff that she would say, and how I shouldn't show too much skin, or how I should cover everything, or men would be uh, instantly instantly tempted or something like that. I was like, I'm a kid. I don't understand what the fuck.
Yeah.
And it got worse once I started to grow up. Uh, it was I was very vulnerable because I had
Sure.
grown up with these people, and I
Yeah.
trusted them, and I feared them, and so whatever they said was right was right. And
Yeah.
I also had some colorist comments from my grandmother. She would always read. This is also part of Mormonism that I really dislike. There's a Book of Mormon, and in one part, I think it's the Book of Mormon, or one of their many invented books. In one of those, it says that God once cursed people with tan skin to distinguish them from the people that were uh, loyal to him. So she would always tell me that because, well, she was slightly whiter. She wasn't blonde by any means, but she would like to dye her hair that way and do
Yeah.
any weird things. And she also was very misogynistic. She hated my mom, and then she hated me. It was tough. I was so glad when she died, but at the moment, since I was under this um, concept of always forgiving everyone, I even gave a speech on her funeral because I truly believed that I had to forgive her. And I said that she would be with the angels and everything. And I truly meant it. But right
Yeah.
now, God, no, I'm glad she died.
As you look back, you realize, like, what was all. That's that. I mean, that's the. I mean, again, it's an understandable emotion to have. I mean, it sounds absolutely insensitive and disrespectful to even think that, but you can see your moral compass like comes flying in there, and you're like, you guys shouldn't feel this way. But on the flip side, you're realizing what was and what isn't should be, and you're becoming aware of what how unacceptable treating any human being, let alone a family member, in that way looks like. And that's hard.
Yeah, definitely. Once I look back, there are so many things I could have done differently, but something that has helped me a lot is this phrase that I think many people repeat, that I did what I could with my resources. And at first, it was really hard to accept because there were so many horrible things that happened because of my resources not being good enough.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just to continue. Um, I also uh, was bullied when I was in primary school. In middle school, I wasn't, but during high school, I was as well. But to the point where I was really depressed because this person took away all of my friends. And I was really depressed, even
Sure.
before that. Even before that,
Yeah.
I think I started feeling depressed when I was in middle school. Um,
Which is already a terrible spot for anybody in their life. It's like everything is changing physically,
yeah,
emotionally, biologically, right? And then throw that in there, and it's like, well, what do I do with this? What direction do I go? How do I stand on 2 feet? Yeah.
yeah. And that's also in middle school when I started to develop like these secret strategies so as to not let my parents know that I was dating guys, whatever you can call dating in middle school.
Right.
Yeah, um, it was interesting because I would feel very guilty, but I would still go
Sure.
on and do so. Yeah, and I even remember that before I entered high school, I begged on my knees to God for forgiveness for having uh, boyfriends. And yeah, that's the way that it was. Even when I entered university, I was still in the cold, and I remember I wrote an essay about how it was a horrible essay, and I'm really embarrassed about it because looking back, you would think if you read that, you would say this is such a horrible person, such a stupid person, and yeah, the essay was about how Mormons were as oppressed or even more oppressed as the LGBT community. Could you believe like the mental gymnastics I would have had that I would have had to
Yeah.
perform to get there? So it was like what?
Yeah.
And I truly believed it because in the story of Mormonism, there's all of this narration of how they suffered to continue with the church and how they had to travel for miles and miles on end, and they were rejected from every place due to them having the truth of the Lord. And it, it's just ridiculous the way
Yeah.
in which something like that can shape your whole life and the scars that it leaves you because I, I didn't know who I am. I'm still struggling with that because the only thing that I was taught to be was a daughter of God, we should
Yeah.
be really well behaved and obey him all the time, and a future wife, and that was it. That was all that
Yeah.
I could aspire for. So
And is it challenging like now? I mean, take all the other pieces of this puzzle out. Is it challenging to like, I don't want to say like competing narratives, but you have this, this belief that there's a God, and like, that, and then that's a good thing. That's a normal thing. That things that, churches across the world believe, right? But your version of that is not necessarily, one of just believing and having faith, and there's a story where God came from, it, all that, right? Whatever whatever version of God like you believe in, right? You didn't get to necessarily just come into being in church, right? You didn't get to just read a Bible or have this. You had this other scenario going along with it. So is it hard to like, not only just figuring out who you were, but like, can you even embrace the fact that well, maybe I should just ask that. Like, do you still believe in God and having like a faith background, or is that just not even possible because it's so intertwined with this like traumatic experience at this point? Does that make sense?
yeah, no, it's not possible for me, and I don't think it will ever be
Maybe.
because
Yeah.
for me, the way I experienced all of that was very real. It
Yeah.
felt genuine. I was really convinced that that was the way.
Yeah.
And I realized that I don't want to be that type of person anymore because there are sequels to all of this. I don't know if that's the correct word. No, there are like consequences to all of this because it's not only that they tell you to do some things that you don't like, well, what am I complaining about, right? But it's also the mind control. They tell you what to think and how to think, which sources you can uh, consult in order to know more about the truth. So it's like if you wanted to know more about the history of the church, we would have to go to the official pages of the church, not look anywhere else. And it was all of this. We had classes, we had this sort of dialectical method. We would
Yeah.
ask different questions, but they were all really guided and they weren't really critical. So I learned to
Yeah.
think that way. So that's why
Yeah.
I was mentioning that I felt impaired later on because I knew I had this potential. I had all this time, but I was at such a lower level when it came to critical thinking compared to some
Yeah.
of my classmates that I realized this is am I really in college? Am I really qualified to be here? Also,
Yeah.
they would control like the narrative regarding your body, what you should do with it, how you should treat it, what you could drink and eat. And uh, I remember I couldn't wear tank tops because they were considered
Too much.
obscene and not appropriate. They would be because they would be showing the shoulders, like what a
Yeah.
and yeah, there was it was all surrounded by guilt and these false promises of eternal life and
Yeah.
just following this path And if you do that, then everything will be alright. And if something goes wrong, well, that's God's plan. There was an answer for everything, you know. But once you're out
Yeah.
there, you realize and you face the uncertainty. And I guess that's part of what I've always been an anxious person, but I guess that's whenever at that time I started to develop more of my anxious traits, and then
Sure.
I was finally diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and then it took a while. I've been to therapy. I was with someone who would only talk with me. I would mention her how I felt, and then once the hour was done, she would be like, "Well, that's all. See you next week." I wouldn't get any feedback or input or guidance, and
Yeah.
I was there. I stood there. I stood that for about a year because it was during the pandemic, and I was really desperate for help
Something.
because
Yeah.
also my parents wouldn't let me go out of the house for 2 years. I had to rebel, and actually I remember the first thing I did was going to Walmart. I live near Walmart. It's literally one street away from my house, and I couldn't even go there. I spent 2 years at home, and that was intense because I, the way I dealt with that, and while I was dealing with that, I also had to take care of an aunt that had cancer, terminal one, a very
Hmm.
aggressive tumor on the brain. So I was at home. I was I I really
Dealing
loved.
with.
I appreciated her. She she was a very important part of my life. She always loved me, so I wanted to be there for her. And I saw her slowly decay,
Fall apart.
which
Yeah.
was terrible, um, and horrible and excruciating. Because and I was experiencing that, and I was also taking my college classes online, about to finish my degree. So it was a lot. I
Yeah.
was also trying to deal with an online relationship. We wanted to start a relationship face to face at school, but then the pandemic hit, and then when we went quarantine, there was no way. And
No
as
doubt.
I told you, my parents wouldn't let me go out, so this was a whole year of our relationship online. And yeah, it was. I was. I was codependent.
Sure.
I had always been codependent up to that point. I felt like that
Yeah.
I needed to be perfect to the people that I dated, and if I wasn't, then it would mean that I was a failure, that I didn't deserve to be loved. I measured my value, um, based
Others.
on their standards,
Yeah.
and whenever, um, yeah, whenever I had a partner, it would be up to them to treat me right. I wouldn't ask them to treat me right. It would be just whatever they wanted, and yeah, it was a tough time because I wasn't feeling that my needs were met, but
Yeah.
I wasn't able to say anything about it. I
Because
would
that's
just,
all you knew,
sorry.
right? I say because that's really all you've known all your life, right? That I mean, every piece of your life has been dictated to you, and so it's like it's almost like you feel it's unacceptable to think about how you feel and what that means and how to interpret that and all that, right? Yeah.
Totally, there was no space uh, in the cult to ever
Feel.
know yourself.
Yeah.
If you follow the principles exactly as they were mandated, which I did, you could clearly understand everything that you were supposed to do. But no, that's not the reality of life.
Yeah.
Uncertainty exists, and I have a lot of trouble dealing with uncertainty. And I
Because of that. Yeah.
immediately uh, associate that with the fact that I was in a place in which everything was already established.
Yeah.
And, and yeah, it was a lot during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Also, one of my dogs passed away during 2021. It was awful. My dogs are like my babies.
Yeah.
So seeing her die, it was also sudden. There were three
Wow.
days in which she started feeling weak, and we took her to the vet. And I remember the exact words that the vet said. That were like, "Well, there's nothing else we can do. We could put her down immediately." And I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I was with my father. My father was still speaking to me then, and then we brought her home, and we all said our goodbyes to her. It was sort of a ceremony of sorts. We would be. She was just there lying on her bed, just breathing with difficulty, and we would get close to tell her how much we loved her and say goodbye. And then she passed away the next morning, and that hurt deeply because
Yeah.
I had felt so alone my whole life. Like I couldn't trust my parents with any personal matters, you know? The minute
Yeah.
I decided to gather the courage and tell my parents about this online relationship that I had, the comments from my father were that it was astounding how I could have these two different lives at once, and how dare I lie to them. It was like as if they were always open to conversation, right? But they never were.
But not
So
that kind of conversation. Only the
yeah,
conversation that they wanted to be open to, right?
right. And as long as I did what they wanted to, as I met the expectations, but um, well, I was mentioning this first time that I went to Walmart after the pandemic. It was really rebellious, and I felt so good to actually breathe air outside. You know, I got it through the windows, right, for that time, but it was different. See the
Yeah.
sunlight, just I felt sort of alive again.
Yeah.
And then there was this occasion in which I asked for permission to go see a friend. It was a whole ordeal, but then in the end, I was like, well, do whatever the fuck you want. Like, that was my father. Like, okay, I will. So I went there, we ate, and then she asked me, oh, do you want to stay over so that we can have like a little, what is it? Like, like a
It's
little,
like a
like sleepover?
sleepover. Yeah.
Yeah, like a sleepover. So I asked my father and my mother. My grandfather had recently passed away. My maternal grandfather had recently passed away due to COVID. Someone not wearing a mask went to speak to him. He was 80 years old. He got sick and he couldn't see it.
Yeah.
So, that was very recent, and I was aware of that.
Yeah.
And my father used that to try and manipulate me because the message I got, I still have it there to remember why I'm not talking to him. Because he said that I was stupid and that I was putting the whole family at risk. And what if I wanted to kill all of them? You know, it was the end of
It's a lot of pressure.
2021. And there was, you know, I was wearing a mask. I was making sure when I got home, I would like be inside my room, like all everything sealed. So I would take the necessary measures because we always were like that during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's what he told me, and he started insulting me, and he said that now I would have a new family, and it was all of this guilt tripping.
Yeah.
Just
And
was,
added pressure.
of course, in the end, I didn't stay over, and I just went back home. But my father wasn't speaking to me. That's what my father does all of the time. Ever since I was little, he used to, for instance, when he used to get mad at my mom. He would just ignore her, like give her the cold shoulder, as they would say, and just walk past her, just let her behind, and my mom would be the one that would be walking, running behind him. And there's there was always like this. Whenever he didn't like something, he would ignore you. He wouldn't speak to you at all.
Hmm.
So I decided that this time I had enough, and I didn't start the conversation. I didn't beg for his forgiveness as we all used to, and he has never spoken to me ever since. And he comes back. He comes by the house sometimes, and he's just there, and he wouldn't
Same thing.
literally say anything to me. It's like I don't exist, and I'm really glad that happened because that I felt like a huge weight was lifted for me, because having to please him was
Too
very
much.
hurtful.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I ended up not talking to my father because he wanted me to beg for him, and I wasn't about to do that. So and I'll never do that. Mm, yeah.
Where do you think this? I'll leave it at this here. With all of this that's gone on, whether you're aware of it or not, I mean, and I don't even know you, and I could see it, and you could see it in the smile that you have that strength there, and the things that you're saying, like that, like you see that weight, you see that this way of treating somebody, a child, their own child, is not right. You see the way that this cult is treating you is not appropriate. Having all this being dictated to you all your life, somehow you found a way to not fit into that mold. And however hard that work is going to be, however long that work is going to take, you are at least aware that you want to do that work and that there is something better out there that you want to head towards. Where do you think that strength comes from, given that none of that was told to you? You're not allowed to have your own strength, but you have it. Where do you think that comes from for you? That's okay. There may not be an answer. I don't want you to add a pressure to that answer, but I at least want you to be aware that that is there. Like you could see that you have that in there. So I'm just curious if you have ever explored where that comes from.
Thank you. First of all, and I think it varies. Sometimes dogs mean a lot to me. They're like my family. And sometimes it's like little things like the way they wiggle their tails or how they cuddle. It's just I really think that I am able to see the beauty in life despite of the horrors. And I have focused on that despite of all the terrible horrible things. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I'm always happy and upbeat because I
No,
tried to
that's
commit
life.
suicide last year, and I was at a psych ward for
Yeah.
21 days. It's like a very long period according to I don't know what standard, but I remained there. And then I got out, and I felt better. But today is one of those days in which I'm having a crisis. So it's just like sometimes
Ebbs and
everything
flows.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly does. And that's okay. I mean, that's like I said in the beginning. I mean, that's what happens in life, and I don't want to say that like normalizes it or it diminishes the ups or the downs or any of that, but having that awareness that things are not always going to be okay. Um, it's important to recognize just as much as that they are okay, because it kind of, it's like I like to say, there's seasons in life, and some seasons are crappy and rainy, like it currently is here, and some are bright and sunny. But I mean, you can certainly see the strength there. And so I thank you for sharing that strength.
thank you. Yeah, I think it's a long way to go. I have
Yeah,
struggled with the idea of it being a long period of time, but I have definitely made progress. I have to write it down to make it visible so that I don't forget because I tend to forget. And whenever I have a crisis, it's like, oh my god, I'm here again. Like, why is this happening again? And
Yeah.
then I recently got a new diagnosis with borderline personality, and it's like it, it seems like it never ends. But
Yeah.
I mean, I may need to be uh in how can I explain this? It's a long way to go, but I have already walked some steps, you know? It's not
Yeah.
like I'm right at the starting line. I have made progress, and I cherish that, and I'm grateful for that because otherwise I wouldn't be here. And
Yeah.
yet, new challenges keep on appearing and they will keep on happening. But I just, I'm here, I'm
Yeah.
listening, and I'm learning about life. So that's exciting.
And all,